Okay, guys, so now we will start element number five. Element number five discusses about the physical and psychological health. So, what are the learning outcomes of this element? In this element, we're going to describe the health effects associated with the exposure to noise and appropriate control measures. So, as we discussed just a few minutes ago, that one of the categories that Nebosh has identified hazard categories is noise. Okay, so the first hazard category is noise, and we're going to discuss about the exposure to noise and what are the hazards and appropriate control measures of noise. Then we're going to describe the health effects associated with exposure to vibration. Now, vibration is the next hazard category that we will discuss, and then we will discuss the control measures for vibration. Then we're going to discuss the health effects associated with ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, which is the next hazard category. And also we'll discuss the control measures. We'll also discuss the causes of work-related mental ill health. This is the next hazard category, work-related mental ill health and how the condition can be managed. And then we're going to discuss the risk factors and appropriate controls of violence at work. So this is the next hazard category we will discuss here. And finally, we will discuss the effects of substance abuse on health and safety at work. Okay. So guys, these are the hazard categories that we will discuss. We're going to discuss number one, noise, number two, vibration, number three, ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, number four, mental ill health, number five, violence at work, and number six, substance abuse. So we are going to cover six hazard categories in this element. Okay. First, noise. 5.1 in noise. So, noise, who is affected and how? Who is affected? Obviously, construction workers, they are affected by noise because they work in an industry where there is continuous noise. Where is the noise generated from? The noise is generated from plant, equipment, machinery. For example, the concrete breakers that you are using on site, the heavy equipment that is used on site. There is so much noise generated, and the construction workers are exposed to noise. Obviously, the machinery operators who are operating this equipment, they are also exposed to noise. Then we have uniformed services. For example, the military, the police, obviously they use small arms and artillery, which generates noise. And obviously it is their profession, the army's profession or occupation. It deals with small arms and artillery. So it is considered an occupational hazard as well. So they are exposed to the noise from small arms and artillery. Then entertainment sector workers, okay, how are they exposed to noise? Because they are working around loud music that can have an effect on their hearing as well. Then there are manufacturing workers. Manufacturing workers are also exposed to a lot of noise because they are working in industrial machinery, and obviously industrial machinery generates a lot of noise as well. Then call center staff, people who are working in the call center, they are using headphones all day, and obviously they can get acoustic shock from the headsets. So these are the jobs which are affected by exposure to noise. Okay, how does it cause harm to you? Noise basically it causes different types of health effects. There are physical health effects and there are psychological health effects. Okay, so this is how you will be harmed. Okay, so who might be harmed is the construction workers, blah blah blah. And how will they be harmed? They will be harmed by having physical effects which could be temporary or permanent. What are the temporary health effects that they will face? Number one, if you are exposed continuously to noise, you will have a reduced hearing, and there will be a temporary threshold shift. What is threshold shift? Threshold shift is basically the threshold of hearing. If it moves, okay, people start, if your threshold shift moves, if your threshold increases, then you will obviously be exposed and you will only be able to hear high volumes, high noises, high sounds. Okay, you will not be able to hear low sounds. Okay, so there is a reduction in the hearing. So there's a temporary threshold shift. So your hearing threshold, it changes, it moves. So there is a shift in your threshold, but it is only temporary. For example, ringing in the ears. Okay, tinnitus, temporary tinnitus, that is also a temporary health effect of noise. This happens when you are suddenly exposed to too much noise. For example, if there is a if you fire a bullet, okay, you will hear ringing in your ears. Temporary ringing ear in your ears will be there. This is called temporary tinnitus. Okay, but this is temporary and this is short term. But if you are continuously exposed to noise again and again, constantly, these changes, these physical effects, they become permanent. Okay, how will they become permanent? You might have permanent tinnitus. You will have a continuous ringing in your ears all the time. Okay, this is the sound that you will hear in your ear. Usually when you are near a blast, or if you have thrown a cracker, okay, or if you fire a bullet, you hear a small ringing in your ears for a short while, and suddenly for a short while you won't be able to hear properly. Even in movies, when you see an explosion goes off, it shows you that the persons who have what you call it affected from the a blast, they cannot hear properly for a short while. That is temporary threshold shift. Also there is ringing in the ear, there's a sound, that is your temporary tinnitus. But sometimes if you're exposed to this on regular occasions, if you're exposed to high levels of noise again and again, this becomes permanent. So you can have permanent tinnitus because of continuous exposure. And you can also have noise induced hearing loss. That can become, that is called a permanent threshold shift. So permanently your hearing will be affected, and you will only be able to hear loud noises. If somebody shouts, then only you will be able to hear, and you won't be able to hear low noises. Okay, inability to hear vehicles, warnings, and conversation. So obviously, if you are affected, your hearing is affected, you won't be able to hear vehicles or warning signs or conversations, which can be very, very high risk, which can be very, very risky for you. Then there is psychological effects, which include stress, and it can also have concentration problems as well. So these are the effects of noise. Obviously, in order to control these hazards, we need to make sure that we follow certain exposure standards. There are different standards which are set by different countries around the world. There are no harmonized standards globally. Everybody follows their own regulations. UK, they have their own regulation, which is called the Control of Noise at Work. And some countries follow the EU directive. In UAE, they have their own legal requirements as well. But here are some normal or generic levels of exposure. So usually there are lower exposure action values. Lower exposure action values, basically if you have a daily or weekly personal noise exposure of 80 decibels. Now decibel basically is the unit of measurement of noise. Okay, so the greater the decibels, the greater the noise is. Okay, so if you have an exposure or daily exposure of up to 80 decibels, you will remain safe. And a peak sound exposure is 135 decibels. So basically, if you are exposed to more than 80 decibels on a continuous or a daily or a weekly exposure, then you need to take actions. Okay, then you need to put in place certain control measures such as hearing protection, or carry out the health surveillance, and have other measures to reduce the level of noise. Okay, a peak sound pressure of 135 decibels. So you can also be exposed to noise levels up to 135 decibels peak, which is an impulse noise once a day, okay, or twice a day. But you cannot be continuously exposed to this sound level, okay. So these are the lower levels, and then there are upper exposure action values: a daily or weekly personal oil exposure of more than 85 decibels, and a peak exposure of 137 decibels. And limit values: this is the maximum that you can be exposed to: a daily or weekly personal noise of 87 decibels, and a peak sound pressure of 140 decibels. Now, basically, these are certain standards. These are basically varying in different countries. Some countries says it should be 85, 80. Some countries say it should be 87. Some countries say the peak sound pressure should be 135. Some say it should be 140. So these are the lower and higher limit values which are going on globally. Um, the main, what you call it, thing you need to take away from this is that if noise exposure reaches a certain level, then you need to take certain actions, which is very, very important. So what are the basic control measures for noise? How can we prevent noise exposure to the workers? Obviously, you need to understand how the noise travels from the source to the receiver. So the source, basically, let's say this is the noise source. Okay, it will travel to the affected person directly through the direct sound waves reaching his ear directly. It can also reach indirectly by reflecting from the roof or reflecting from the wall. So you will have reflected noise, and he will also be hearing noise from the pathway from other solid structures in which the noise source is in contact with. So these are various ways the noise is reaching the receiver. Now, what are the control measures you can have in place? You can reduce the noise at the source. How can you reduce the noise at the source? Eliminate the source of noise. Okay, here you can see the hierarchy of controls as we discussed in element number 3. So you reduce the noise at the source, you eliminate the exposure. Then you can substitute it. Okay, substitute it is something which is less noisy. Modify the process. Carry out maintenance of the equipment. If you carry out regular maintenance of the equipment, you can get rid of the noise. You can carry out damping or silencing, or you can do interruption of the pathway by insulation, isolation, and absorption. Then you can you can protect the receiver by either building an acoustic heaven or by providing them hearing protection. Hearing protection is of different types. We can have ear defenders, which can be in the form of ear muffs and earplugs. You can use earplugs as well. Then noise surveillance is also a very, very important control measure. It is very, very important to carry out health surveillance. Health surveillance, basically, it helps you identify any changes to your hearing level. Okay, so usually this is called audiometry. Audiometry allows the identification of workers with pre-existing hearing damage and new hearing damage. You can also remove or exclude workers who have existing hearing damage. You can exclude them from the high noise areas, and you can also investigate the noise controls to rectify the problem. Okay, next is vibration. Vibration is also a very, very common hazard category which the workers are exposed to. Okay, so basically what happens due to vibration? Vibration has various health effects, including hand-arm vibration syndrome. Hand-arm vibration syndrome, basically it causes it has various health effects associated with it, such as vibration of white finger. So basically what happens is that when you are using a vibrating equipment or vibrating tools, this vibration, it is energy. This vibration energy, it disrupts your blood flow. So your blood flow is going around in your body to keep your body organs healthy. Okay, but when you are exposed to vibration, this vibration, it causes a disruption in the blood flow, which causes various health effects, including blanching of the fingers, which is called a vibration white finger. It can cause nerve damage. So you'll feel tingling in your nerves. You'll feel tingling in your extremities, such as your hand and your feet. It will cause muscle weakening. and it will cause not joint damage as well. And another issue caused by vibration is called carpal tunnel syndrome. So these are all the health effects that you can be exposed to because of vibration. You can also get whole body vibration effects such as back pain. The most common people who are affected by this is the drivers, such as the dump trucks drivers or heavy equipment drivers, such as loader and dozer drivers, or if you have people operating the jackhammer or other vibratory tools, people using the hand power tools, they are exposed to vibration as well. Okay, vibration exposure standards. Basically, when do you need to take action? You need to take action when the vibration that you are exposed to is more than 2.5 meter per second square. So you need to take actions for HAVS. And if it is more than 0.5, you need to take action for the whole body vibration. Okay, and there are daily exposure limits as well. Daily exposure should not be more than 5 for HAVS, hand arm vibration syndrome, and for whole body vibration it should not be more than 1.15. Okay, so you need to carry out a vibration risk assessment, reduce the exposure levels, give training to the workers, carry out health surveillance, reduce the exposure of the workers, and reduce the amount of vibration of the equipment. Okay, so basic control measures include number one, reduce the vibration at the source. So you can eliminate the vibrating sources, eliminate the use of vibrating equipment and tools, substitute the tools and equipment or the vibration hazard with something which is less hazardous, change the work technique, carry out regular maintenance of the vibration equipment, interrupt the pathway of the vibration. For example, carry out isolation, carry out damping, increase the duration. So you can limit the time of exposure, do job rotation, and provide personal protective equipment. Then obviously there is a role of health surveillance. Um, Obviously, the above a certain standard, if you're exposed, you need to carry out health surveillance to identify the workers who have pre-existing vibration damage and make sure that they don't get any new vibration damage. You should also remove workers who have preconditions from vibration sources. You should not allow them to work near vibration sources, and you need to carry out investigation. Next is radiation. Radiation is another common hazard in the workplace. So basically, there are two types of radiation. There is ionizing radiation and then there is non-ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation, basically, it is the radiation which does not cause ionization in material that absorbs it. What is ionization? Ionization is when a certain material is bombarded with energy, is bombarded with rays, they tend to ionize. They break up, the atoms break up into various ions. Okay, so this is called ionization. The radiation which does not cause ionization is called non-ionizing radiation, and for example visible light. And the radiation which causes ionizing is called ionizing radiation, and it does cause ionization in the materials that absorb it, for example X-rays. Okay, what are the health effects of radiation? Obviously, ultraviolet radiation, it is high frequency, it is electromagnetic radiation emitted by white hot materials such as the arc produced during the arc welding. Then there is visible light. It is electromagnetic radiation between the ultraviolet and infrared frequencies, and it's visible to the human eye. Then there is infrared, which is low frequency electromagnetic radiation, and it is emitted by red hot materials such as molten metal. Microwaves, they are low frequency electromagnetic radiation and emitted by microwave generator. And then are radio waves, which are low frequency electromagnetic emitted by an antenna. Okay, typical sources of non-ionizing radiation include ultraviolet rays. The source is the sunlight and arc welding. What are the health effects? It causes skin burn, arc eye, and skin cancer. Then there are visible light. The sources are laser and causes temporary blindness. Then there is infrared, which causes red hot steel. Glass manufacture is the source, and health effects is redness of skins and burns and eye cataracts. Then microwave source is food preparation and telecommunication, and the health effects are internal and external heating and organ damage. Then radio waves are generated by radios and radars and cause internal heating and organ damage as well. What are the typical protection measures you need for non-ionizing radiation? Obviously, for UV rays, you can cover your exposed skin, protect your eyes by glasses. Visible light lasers, you can protect them by avoiding the shining in the eyes and by using eye protection and shielding. Infrared, you can protect yourself by covering your exposed skin and protecting the eyes. Microwaves, you need to keep safe distance, isolation, and lockout. And radio waves, again, safe distance, isolation, and lockout. Types of ionizing radiation include alpha, beta, X-rays, gamma rays, and neutrons. These are various types of rays that are used in the industry. The health effects obviously includes, there are two types of health effects. There are acute health effects and then there are chronic health effects. Acute health effects are basically health effects which are reversible and they result due to a single exposure. Okay, a single exposure to the high dosage of any health agent, it causes acute health effects, and these are mostly reversible. Then there are chronic health effects. Chronic health effects are usually irreversible. You cannot get better if you have any chronic health effect. Okay, and this chronic health effect usually develops after repeated exposure. It doesn't have to happen in one exposure. Okay, so basically, what are the acute and chronic health effects of ionizing radiation? Number one, acute health effects are radiation sickness and diarrhea, hair loss, anemia, which is red blood cell damage, and the reduced immunity system, and your white blood cells get damaged as well. What are the chronic health effects of ionizing radiation? This includes cancer, genetic mutations, and birth defects. Okay, so what are the control measures for radiation? First of all is time. Reduce or minimize the exposure to ionizing radiation, and your time that you spend in radiation, it should be proportional to the dosage. So if the dosage increases, you need to reduce your exposure time. If the dosage reduces, you can increase your exposure time. Distance, obviously, alpha and beta rays, they can't travel long distances in the air. So if you increase your distance from the source of ionizing radiation, you can protect yourself. Obviously, there is a simple rule of thumb, which is called the inverse square law, which is usually double the distance, quarter the dose. Okay. Then shielding. Shielding is basically providing a barrier between the person and the source of radiation, such as using lead. Lead is very, very well known to protect against ionizing radiation. And it's very common to see, especially if you go to countries which are part of World War II, they have a lot of houses built in those countries which have lead lining, lead walls. This was because there was a threat of atomic bomb, and in order to protect themselves from the radiation of the atomic bomb, people used lead in their houses. Okay, so that you can use lead to shield yourself from ionizing radiation. Then obviously you need to have legal requirements in place. Legal requirements have certain dosage limits of exposure which you cannot exceed. For general public, you cannot be exposed to more than one millisievert per year, and for workers you cannot be exposed to more than 20 millisieverts per year. So usually people who work in ionizing radiation, they carry film badges or they wear dosimeters where they go, and they have to record all their exposure and they have to measure how much millisieverts they have been exposed to. Other protection strategies include elimination of exposure to as far as reasonably practicable. So don't allow workers to be exposed to radiation. Reduce the exposure to the lowest level, which is reasonably practicable. Don't exceed the relevant radiation dosage limits. Carry out a detailed risk assessment. Give training and information to the workers. Carry out health surveillance. So all these are protective measures. Health surveillance is also a very important protective measure. Health surveillance might include the skin checks, respiratory checks, exposure records, and sickness records as well. Okay, next health hazard category is mental ill health. Mental ill health is very relevant, and people don't realize that it is a serious hazard, but it is a really big hazard. In UK, these are some of the figures from the UK. There are 440,000 work-related stress cases, people who get depressed, people who face anxiety. There are millions and millions of days lost because of work-related workplace mental health issues. Anxiety, obviously, anxiety is a feeling of unease, such as a worry or fear that can be mild or severe. So, if you are anxious, you might be exposed to panic disorder. You might be having PTSD, which is post traumatic stress disorder, and you might be exposed to depression as well. Depression is a feeling of extreme sadness, despair, or inadequacy that lasts for a long time. Okay, so if you have anxiety over a long period of time, you can say that you are depressed. The severity and symptoms, they can vary. At the mildest level, people can have a low spirit or a low mood, and at the severest health effects is people can feel suicidal. You might be able, I mean, if you're severely depressed, you might be even thinking of taking your life as well. So it can be very stressful. Then there is work related stress. Stress basically is the adverse reaction that people have to excessive pressure of other demands placed on them. Stress, obviously, it has psychological, physical, and behavioral effects, and it can lead to serious issues if prolonged. Okay, so what are the symptoms of work-related stress? Psychologically, you will feel anxiety, low self-esteem, and depression. Physically, people have sweating, fast heartbeat, high blood pressure. You can get skin rashes, muscle tension, headaches, and dizziness. Behavioral, you have sleeplessness, poor concentration, poor decision making, mood swings, irritability, alcohol consumption, drug abuse, and absence from work as well. Okay, so what are the causes of stress? Obviously, stress is caused by excessive demands, lack of control over the work, lack of support from your management or your company, poor workplace relationships with your colleagues or co-workers, lack of clarity about your role, and the threat of change and change itself. All these things, they cause stress, and they can cause serious issues in your health. It is very important to make sure that people who are exposed to mental ill health problems, they stay in work. So employer or companies, they should have policies and procedures in place that help the people who are suffering for ill health to remain in work. So you need to make sure that you identify people who are having mental health problems, and you need to make sure that they fully recover and are able to manage the health problems as well. Mental health, obviously, it has been stigmatized. People don't think it is a serious issue, and that's why it is not given due consideration. Obviously, work is often the best place to be, so don't run away from your work. You need to be at work all the time. Legislation also plays a good role in controlling work related stress. So, in order to manage work related stress, you need to make sure you control the demands, you give adequate control, provide support, build relationships, provide clarity of role, and change the way things are so that the workers feel comfortable. So, demands should be reasonable and sufficient resources should be provided, adequate control should be given, proper information, instruction, and training to be provided. Anti-harassment bullying policies should be available. Clear job description, role and responsibilities should be there, and planning and preparation should be done in order to manage change. Last hazard of today is work-related violence. Work-related violence is any incident in which a person is abused, threatened, or assaulted in circumstances related to their work. So if your manager or your colleague threatens you, abuses you, it is called violence at work. It is not necessarily somebody has to punch you. No, violence at work is also related to verbal assault as well. If somebody is shouting at you, somebody is threatening you or abusing you, that is also work related violence. Okay, what are the categories of occupations that are exposed to work related violence? Obviously, people who handle cash, they can be exposed to work related violence. Loan workers, representing authorities, people wearing uniforms such as security guards, people dealing with other people under stress. So the people who are under stress, they can, I mean, easily resort to violence. Dealing with people under the influence of drugs and alcohol, um, and activities in which you have to say no. Okay, so risk factors for violence at work. Obviously, the people who are handling emergencies in the hospital, police, social workers, bus and taxi drivers, firefighters, traffic wardens, and railway staff and teachers. All these are people who are exposed to the violence at work. How do you control violence at work? You need to collect and analyze the data reports, interview the staff, and carry out staff surveys. You can also use control closed circuit television, CCTVs, have a zero tolerance policy, provide security staff, provide CCTV, security measures, security doors, minimize the waiting time, display the waiting times, give training to the workers, provide adequate panic alarms, and make sure the environment is pleasant. Workers who conduct house visits, you can control the risk of violence to them by not sending them in high risk areas, by reporting and investigating accidents, vetting the customers, logging all the visits, carrying out pre and post visit communication, giving training, feedback, and no visits after dark, and not carrying cash or valuables. Substance abuse at work. Substance abuse basically refers to the misuse of various drugs or substances such as alcohol, legal drugs, illegal drugs, and solvents. So these are the substances which can be misused or abused at work. Okay, alcohol basically, if it is taken at lunchtime or at work, it can seriously stay in your system even before the night, and it can cause serious issues. Legal drugs, some legal drugs, they can also influence your thinking. Illegal drugs, obviously, heroin, cannabis, cocaine, narcotics, all these can be dangerous. Solvents, these are substances in the workplace which are used for various activities, but people tend to misuse them by sniffing substances such as glue, solvent cleaners, and paint spray cans, etc. So all these are things, substances at work which can be abused. Okay, how can we? Okay, so what are the general signs and symptoms of people who are abusing alcohol and drugs? Number one, they'll be coming to the office late, increased absenteeism, they'll have poor quality of work, reduced output, dishonesty, theft, or potentially they want to fund a habit as well, irritability and mood swings, deterioration in work relationships. The effects it will have, obviously, it will have sensory impairment. You'll have a skewed perception, impaired motor controls, fatigue, and drowsiness. The risk for driving and operating machinery will be increased, and it will be difficult to make decisions. What are the control measures? Obviously, you need to have a good drug control policy available. So you should not allow any alcohol or drugs during working hours. Obviously, you can implement the legal requirements regarding the drink drive law. You can set non-statutory requirements yourself. Provide access to the workers for rehabilitation and treatment. Have a disciplinary procedure in place. Give information instructions to the training to the workers as well. Carry out random testing as well. Okay, guys, so this is the end of today's element. So basically, what we have discussed today is that we have explained the exposure to excessive noise. We have outlined the various ways to control noise. We have discussed hand arm vibration, whole arm body vibration syndrome. We have discussed the control means of vibration. We discussed ionizing and non ionizing radiation. We discussed work related ill health. We discussed work related violence. And we discussed various substances which are misused or abused at work. Okay, guys, so this is the end of today's session. This is basically the end of IG2 element number one, which is element five in the overall units. So basically, what you need to include, what you need to remember here from these slides is the hazards and controls.